All right. So good morning and welcome to the RIAC Learning Series. My name is Vanessa Brewer. I am the Regional Interagency Council Program Administrator. My co-host is Lee Taylor. Lee is the State Interagency Council Program Administrator. And we work at the Department for Behavioral Health, Developmental, and Intellectual Disabilities. Our presentation today is Fair Team 101, and our presenter is Jimmie Riley. Jimmie is the Clinical Supervisor of Family and Juvenile Services with the Administrative Office of the Courts. And so just a brief history of the connection between RIACs and Fair Teams. Per KRS 200.505 and KRS 605.035, which I will include in follow-up materials to all participants. RIACs are directed by statute to serve as the regional locus of accountability for the system of care, and also to participate on family accountability intervention and response teams, which are also known as FAIR teams. And the role of this partnership is really twofold. So since RIACs work with various child and family serving agencies in their regions, including the behavioral health safety nets, they are a wealth of information regarding available community resources and services that not everyone may know about, especially for children, youth, and transition age youth with complex needs. So one of the goals is to collaborate with the FAIR teams to develop enhanced case management plans and service referrals for juveniles to help them to avoid formal court. Another goal of this partnership is to assist the FAIR teams with sustainable system-level solution-focused findings when service gaps and or barriers to services and supports for youth are identified. So taking these barriers back to the RIAC to work strategically with system of care partners to find solutions that promote better outcomes for all youth with a risk of behavioral health needs in their families. So before I turn it over to our presenter, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items. Please mute your mics if you haven't already. I did speak with Jimmie before this presentation, and he has asked that we hold our questions to the end. So if you want to put your questions or comments in chat, Lee and I will be monitoring that, but we will provide some time at the end for some questions and answers. Also, this workshop is going to be recorded and posted on the RIAC's YouTube channel, and so we'll put that link in the chat box. And you can also go there and see all of the other sessions that have been recorded and stored as well. As a reminder, these sessions are for you. So if you have questions, please feel free to ask them. Again, you could use the chat box if you prefer, or you can come off mute after Jimmie is finished with the presentation. Also, a session evaluation link will be posted in the chat box towards the end of the session, so please take a moment to complete this. And as always, certificates of attendance are available by request, and so you can email me if you'd like to have one, and I'll put my email in the chat box. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jimmie Riley.
Hello, everybody. So I want to say happy Friday to everybody before we get going. I know it feels good to most of us to have time to be here. Working on getting my PowerPoint going right now. I'm going to apologize. I'm not going to be having my video going because I need to have my connectivity working the right way. So make sure my sound is going here. All right. So we're going to be talking about the FAIR team. I see there are some CDWs and CDSs on this meeting today. So I want to apologize to them that they're going to be getting some review. But hopefully for the rest of you, you might hopefully come into this and get some answers to some questions that you've had, either related to the FAIR team in general, to our program. So I really hope that this is beneficial for all of you. And I do want to answer your questions. So if you do have questions, I would love to answer them at the end. So it's only fair to talk about our program when talking about the FAIR team. So we're going to be looking at the purpose and philosophy behind SB 200. We're going to describe the role of our program, and then we're going to understand the roles and responsibilities of the FAIR team. That's our goal for this session here. And this is our mission statement. I'm going to try my hardest not to insult anyone's intelligence in reading slides to you all today. So I'm not going to read this to you, but this is our mission statement, and this drives all the work that we do within the CDW program, whether it is on the FAIR team or it's in our day-to-day office work. we're always trying to strive to meet this mission statement.
Hey, Jimmie,
Yes,
let me interrupt for 1 second. Your voice is fading in and out. Are you by chance moving away from the mic?
I'm not, and that's why I stopped sharing my audio, because it happens for some reason. So
Okay,
better now. I'll get really close.
great. Thank you.
I'll get really close to the computer and see if that helps. Thank you for letting me know. So this is what we have here as far as the Senate Bill 200. Maybe you've heard of the Senate Bill 200, maybe you haven't, but this kind of talks a little bit about this. A task force was created in 2012, coming out of House Concurrent Resolution 129. In 2013, the General Assembly directed the task force to review and provide recommendations for reforms. So that's where we see Senate Bill 200 coming. I'm going to share a brief video with you, hopefully, and it'll talk a little bit about Senate Bill 200 and the process here.
I got my first arrest when I was 11 years old. You know, you don't go from banging on the streets of Atlanta, Georgia with a life expectancy of 15 years to Commissioner of Juvenile Justice accidentally. You go there because somebody had the courage to believe more and give you the opportunity to become more. And that's what we have to do. That's our real work.
Senate Bill 200 is adopted.
Since the late 1990s, the rate at which juveniles are arrested for violent crime has been cut in half, and so is the rate at which they're held in juvenile correctional facilities. State policy leaders are now poised to accelerate and lock in these trends toward more public safety at less taxpayer expense.
The time is right for juvenile justice reform. We're living in a time now where the opportunity has never been greater. We need to recognize that we can do a better job with our kids.
States from Georgia to Kentucky to Hawaii are taking a fresh look at juvenile justice because it was clear the status quo was not working.
Kentucky was spending its money in all the wrong ways.
We weren't getting a good return on investment. We weren't getting results. We weren't getting the best outcomes for our most troubled children. When I started to look at the type of kids that we had at the correctional facility, I realized that the overwhelming majority of them were not at risk to public safety.
Like many judges, we were committing kids by default.
We were putting almost as many kids in some type of detention facility for missing school as we were for committing a crime.
We are forced, because we don't have those local community interventions, to commit them to the state.
We were spending a lot of money on detention, particularly for low-level offenders, when we see that that's not a productive or an effective way to invest in the lives of those kids.
Research shows that juvenile correctional facilities generally fail to produce better outcomes than alternative sanctions, cost much more, and can actually increase reoffending for certain youth.
Putting kids in placement in secure facilities, lockup, does not actually deter crime.
Longer stays don't seem to show any positive effects in terms of reducing rate of rearrest. At some point, we should have a way of thinking about why we're keeping an adolescent in an institution for a longer time period. And if there are reasons to do that, then let's be explicit about that and figure out what we're getting out of it.
To get better results, states are reducing the number of youth sent to correctional facilities and reinvesting a portion of the savings into programs and policies that reduce recidivism.
One of the ways that states can really respond effectively is to be able to sort through kids in terms of low risk, medium risk, high risk kids, and to focus those resources effectively on the adolescents who are going to present the highest risk of public safety problems.
We require judges to apply risk assessment instruments before they can commit kids to ensure that the lower risk kids are not committed to the state.
We're going to see a dramatic shift in the way we serve young people.
These reforms, first of all, are going to keep kids who otherwise would have been sent to a youth prison to remain in the community and receive the type of interventions that need to happen in their home.
There will be a significantly reduced number of actual court cases filed. They will be addressed appropriately with social services on the front end.
To better protect public safety, you need to spend those dollars at the front end of the system versus the back end of the system.
Everything in juvenile justice is about intervention. Prevent a child learning further criminal behaviors and you prevent a future adult criminal.
These reforms are not only making communities safer, but they're saving states money because placing youth in residential facilities is the most expensive correctional option.
When you can divert, or you can avoid sending a low-level child to detention for $100,000 a year, those savings mount up quickly. In the state of Hawaii, it's costing approximately $199,000 a year to incarcerate a youth.
The bottom line is that we have passed a bill that gets better outcomes for children and does so at a lower cost for the taxpayer.
As a result of these reforms, we have realized cost savings. In Georgia, for example, we have already shut down 2 facilities because we are no longer committing low-risk offenders.
States are getting to good public policy by looking at the data. Across all branches of government and the partisan divide, state leaders are coming together to assess their systems and find solutions.
The collaboration on this bill is key. We turned no one away.
The task force was vital to the process because it gave us that credibility and that unified voice to speak with when rolling out a package of legislative reforms.
These reforms are grounded in research and the public supports them.
And the public has always been more positive in its orientation toward youthful offenders.
85% of voters say they are not concerned whether juvenile offenders are sent to correctional facilities or how long they stay there. What matters is reducing the likelihood of future crime.
I really think in some way we're kind of coming back around to what the public kind of expected all the time from the juvenile justice system.
State leaders have successfully adopted reforms that will change the direction of juvenile justice policy and the lives of young people.
For every child that we divert from the criminal justice system and decrease the chances they'll ever enter it, that's a policy win in so many ways.
We go into public service to do those things. That's why we're there.
If we continue on this trajectory, the only children that come to the deep end of our system will be the ones that absolutely need it, and every other child in the Commonwealth and hopefully in the nation move forward to their greatest successes.
So hopefully that's a lot better than me sitting here reading through a couple extra slides. That kind of cuts some of the slides back and you get to watch a video. But ultimately, the evidence shows that the shift of lower level youth and resources from out of home placement to evidence-based community programs is going to lead to safer communities and better outcomes. That summarizes that whole video essentially. And we see that coming out of Senate Bill 200. Now, it's only fair, like I said, for us to talk about our program a little bit to kind of set that foundation, because some of you may not be real familiar with our program. You may have heard that acronym CDW or acronym CDS thrown around and not even know what it even stands for. So here we have CDWs and CDS, and CDW, they work with finding alternative placements prior to arraignment. They do PIs or preliminary inquiries. They formulate, enter into, and supervise diversion agreements with youth. And there are a lot of other things they do as well. But if you're a person that likes to read up on stuff, you can go to KRS 600.020 and you can read all about the CDW requirements. And then as far as a CDS goes, a CDS does everything a CDW does. But in addition to that, they get a training. They have some additional responsibilities like staffing and convening the FAIR teams. And the CDS is actually to administer an evidence-based risk assessment tool called the GAIN Q3 as well. So the roles and responsibilities of a CDW here, you can see some of it summarized here in these little bullets. We have always trying to work collaboratively with our community partners. We want our CDWs to have that community and family engagement that's needed. We're always trying to be strength-based and build those types of skills, always trying to connect them to local resources, initiatives, and partners. And that's oftentimes where RIAC can come into play. And we'll talk some about that later as far as how RIAC kind of steps in different communities and is really that advocate that youth need to be able to connect some dots for them. CDWs negotiate diversion terms with youth. They monitor diversions. They administer a GAIN SS, which is like a 5-minute screener that tells us what their risk level is. And they always are utilizing graduated responses as well. Here's an additional list of some of the things we'll be doing in the day-to-day. You'll notice that the third bullet point, that preliminary intake. In that meeting, they are going over the rights that the juvenile has. They are finding out what barriers may be in place, what strengths are there, what goals a youth may have, what resources they're already processing and working with. Are they already in therapy? Do they need therapy? These kinds of things are all being discussed during that PI that we call. We do not diagnose youth, and we know we are not clinicians. So we're using those gain cues, the gain Q3 and the gain SS, just to be able to help us identify the youth's needs and then connecting them to those resources that they do need. As far as preparation of the CDW program staff, always training, right? Everyone in all their departments, we're always getting the training that we need. And the CDW program is no different. We have evidence-based screening instruments that staff are trained on. They're trained on identifying appropriate services, the principles of effective intervention, trauma, behavioral issues, substance abuse. The list goes on. Always trying to see what juvenile justice research shows us the best practices are, and then we're trying to adapt to those. In accordance with statute, a community resource directory is comprised within the CDW office. Many of you, the departments you work with, are probably in our community resource directories. And so if you ever know about resources in your communities, let your CDS know, because especially if it's something that you know of that's new in your area, it's a great thing to reach out to your CDS and let them know, hey, there's this new program or this new service provider, because that'll help them stay in the loop with that, because they may not know. But that's the goal of that toolkit, is to be able to have all these resources in one place. And every year we share that with DPPs in schools and other community providers and partners, just so everybody can be on the same page with what resources are out there. So what would lead a FAIR team to receiving a youth? We have status and public offenses. And if you don't know, a status offense is something that only a youth can be charged with. That's something like habitual truancy or beyond control. And then you go into the public offense side, which is something that anybody can be charged with, something like theft or terroristic threatening, assault, and the list goes on. So we break that down. A youth comes in the office and they're going to fall under if they fall under one of these categories, at some point they would be referred to the CDS. If they're deemed to be high needs, that's if the gain SS that we mentioned a moment ago, if that deems them high needs, then that youth is going to be transferred over to the court designated specialist. And then they would do their gain Q3. The gain SS is like 5 minutes. You know by 5 minutes, they're not getting a whole lot of information. The gain Q3 that the CDS administers is at least 30 to 45 minutes long. A lot more in-depth questions are being asked. If a youth is FTA or failure to appear for the PI or any other point of our process, they may find themselves being forwarded over to the court designated specialist. A youth has the right to decline diversion. They could come in the office and everything is explained to them and they could say, I don't want a diversion. So that's their right. So then we would send it over to the CDS and then they would process it from there as far as our process goes. And there are always those times where a youth might be unable to complete their diversion for whatever reason, barriers that we could not overcome, or an array of other issues may arise. And if those things do arise, that's what the CDS is there for, and those cases are then referred over. So with the CDS, what are their responsibilities? As we said before, they are a CDW. They do a lot of the same things that a CDW does, but there's a handful of other things that they do that the CDW doesn't. And namely, that would be working with that FAIR team. We expect everyone, CDWs and CDSs alike, to demonstrate those high levels of community engagement, but we especially hope that our CDSs fall into that category of really knowing what's going on in the community, what's available, so that way they can get the youth connected to those. And then again, that gain Q3 that we mentioned. And then there's always presenting these cases to the FAIR team, new cases that come in, presenting those to the FAIR team, cases that they've had for a while, giving updates and different status updates on to barriers that they're still trying to overcome, maybe reaching out to the FAIR team and finding out other alternatives that may be available. And we'll talk more about that later. Always guiding our work are risk factors and criminogenic needs. That's always what we're looking at whenever we have a youth step into our office. And I'm not going to read these definitions to you. They're there for you. But I would like to draw your attention to that static and difference here. The static are those things that cannot be changed. We can't change the fact that a youth has already been charged previously. We can't change some of their family dynamics. But those dynamic risk factors are things that we can change: antisocial peers, personality, substance abuse, those kinds of things. And I want you to just catch that, because we're going to be talking a little bit more about this in a moment. And I want you to be able to kind of keep this in mind. So always looking at risk factors and the criminogenic needs. So when we are working with the youth, we adhere to the principles of effective intervention. This is integral to our program. It's really the foundation of some of the work that we do. And you'll see how it's broken down, where risk is who we're targeting. That's a low risk or a high risk youth. That's the who there. If a youth is low risk, they're going to stay with the CDW. If they're considered high risk youth, then they're going to be going on to the CDS or potentially even court, depending on what the risk and needs assessments and our documents and process say. The need is that what are we trying to target? What interventions do they need? What services do they need? What are their criminogenic needs? That's the what and the need principle. Responsivity really boils down to just barriers. What barriers does this youth and family have? Are there transportation issues? Does this youth have to babysit their siblings? That's going to impact, what time they're getting to school, or what we can do with the youth after school hours. Those kinds of things are going to fall into place with responsivity. And then there's fidelity. If we don't do the risk, need, and responsivity correctly, then we're not going to be adhering to principles of effective intervention correctly. And we know that even the most evidence-based program or practice has to adhere to the principles of effective intervention if they're going to be effective. That's training, programs, interventions, any services. We're always trying to have them adhere to PEI. And a moment ago, so I said static and dynamic, and we're talking about the things you can change and things you can't. And this is where it comes into play. We have something we call the Big Four. You may have heard it in fair team meetings. If you're on a fair team, you may not have. But this is very common language within our department, the Big Four. And you'll notice the top three bullets: antisocial attitude, peers, and personalities. Those are all three dynamic. We can change those. We can make an impact on those in a youth's life. However, history of antisocial behavior, we cannot. That's static. We cannot impact whether or not a youth has been charged previously or anything like that. But if you're wondering here what antisocial attitude, peers, and personality are, the attitude would be like they have attitudes against authority, or maybe they feel like everyone does this antisocial action, so it's okay. That would be, they don't take responsibility. Those kinds of things would fall into antisocial attitudes. Antisocial peers is two-pronged. You may have a youth that has all kinds of antisocial friends, all kinds of friends that are contributing to them making bad choices. That would be an antisocial peer. But also, if a youth does not have any pro-social friends or other peers that they had, then that would also fall into antisocial peers as well. And then we have antisocial personality. And this would be the impulsivity that we see, aggression, lack of empathy, all those kinds of things would fall into this category. So these are the things we're always trying to really address within our diversion: the attitudes, peers, and personality. And I want to break this down in another way in case we look at this and we say, okay, that doesn't even make much sense. Why would you just address those things? I can think of so many other things you would want to address rather than just those three. Some of you are probably thinking that. So here's this study that was done, and we're going to talk about something that we might all understand a little bit different here, and that's heart attacks, right? What is going to contribute to the probability of having a heart attack? And some of the basic information that we all know, here's a list. These are all things we know would contribute, and studies have shown that contribute to your risk. And there are 9 main risk factors that we see here. Excuse me. So looking at this slide here, imagine someone walking into the doctor's office and they tell the doctor, I smoke a couple packs a day, I eat fried food several times a week, my job is very stressful. The doctor can see that this person's carrying a little extra weight around the midsection. The lab results come back and it's showing high lipids, high blood pressure, all of these things. Would it make sense for the doctor to say, okay, we're gonna fix this, just start eating broccoli? you would hopefully expect a lot more from the doctor than just start eating broccoli. Yeah, sure, start eating broccoli for sure. We definitely want to do that. But that's not going to be enough, is it? And that's not the first line of defense that you're going to take. No, instead, you're going to be saying, let's get that cholesterol under control. Let's work on quitting smoking. That's going to be our primary target, our primary goal during this case. So look at this here. This would kind of compare the risk factors and criminogenic needs on the right. And then here on the left is that heart attack stuff. So you're seeing number 1, 2, and 3. These are the top 3 things that need attention ASAP, right? We're trying to get these under control before anything else. And some of these may help. Like if you quit smoking, that might help your hypertension, right? And that's great if those things in the bottom start getting addressed by working through the top 3, but you're working with those top 3 first. And that's how the big 4 works. In addressing the attitudes, peers, and personalities, these are the primary focus. This is our primary goal. The other things may fall into place in addressing these 3, or we may address something like substance use on its own at some other point, but our main priority is always going to be the attitude, peers, and personalities first. Hopefully that helps it make a little bit more sense. So when it comes to our case planning within our department, and just so you know, we're even working right now we're in a transition period where we'll be leaving our normal, typical, historical way of diversion and moving into case plans. So we're in the middle of that transition and that working right now. So we're really excited about that. And it's because we know that if we can get all of these things on this slide in mind, if we keep them in mind, then a youth is going to be more likely to respond to case plans that value their input, right? They're going to respond better to them. We know they're going to be more motivated to work on the tasks and achieve the goals that we've set in place. And they're going to be more receptive with this case management when the expectations and roles are clearly given to them. And these are all things we do already. But when we think about the case plan itself, it's going to help us do these more intentionally. When it comes to effective case management, we want, well, cognitive interaction skills. I don't know if you've heard of cognitive interaction skills. I'll be honest, before I started working with FJS, I had never heard of cognitive interaction skills, but it's something that we are always working with. And if you are on a FAIR team and you'd like to know about cognitive interaction skills, this is a training that could be held for your FAIR team. And you can learn more about this idea since it's a part of what we do. But we know that implementing cognitive interaction skills, connecting youth to services and programs that actually impact the big 4 we mentioned in a positive way, these kinds of things build an infrastructure that goes beyond our diversion. We only have a youth up to 6 months. And you can only do so much change for a youth. So we're always trying to build that infrastructure. So when our diversion is over, this youth already has these kinds of things in place that are going to help them grow and move toward that pro-social change. Always trying to identify the strengths that a youth has and trying to incorporate those into the diversion, not just the strengths, but any goals that a youth may have. If they have a goal they've identified, we would likely put that to be a part of the diversion because it's going to get that buy-in from the youth. They're going to really be invested in trying to make these changes, and it gives us that time to build rapport and to help that youth reach that point of success. And we all know it feels good to do things that you want to get done, right? It feels great to have that list checked off. And we want the youth to have that feeling so that way they can feel that success and see that they can be successful. I mentioned graduated responses much earlier in this presentation, and this is a little bit more about it here. We know from studies that we need to have minimal sanctions. A youth on diversion, it says, are served well by minimal sanctions. And that goes against every bit of us, right? We say, throw the book at them. That'll really get them to stop if we just throw the book at them. But it's against all the studies tell us that we don't want to do that. And it's weird, but the studies show us this. We want our programs to be consistent with the risk, needs, and responsivity. We do not want to respond with disproportionate responses. This can be difficult because sometimes we have youth that are at school and they're also on diversion. And maybe they get in trouble at school and now they're suspended. Well, we don't want to throw extra punishment at a punishment that's already occurred, right? We don't want to throw heavy disproportionate responses on a youth because it's going to increase the chances that they're going to recidivate. Studies show us this, and I'll reference some of these things later, but if you're curious about those studies, I could always point you in the direction of some of these as well, if you're already not aware of them. Our goal is always trying to build that pro-social behavior in the youth. So graduated responses in diversion are not effective in these cases here. Instead of just getting a hold of them for the negative, we also want to talk to them about the positive. And that makes sense to us, right? Anytime, if you only get a call from someone when something bad is going on, when you look at your caller ID, you're going to go, oh my gosh, seriously, it's them again. What now, right? But if you're talking to someone and you talk about positives and negatives, you're more apt to be able to not feel so negative when you just see their name pop up on your phone, right? It's the same idea. We don't want to just have negative contact with youth. You want to let them know when they're doing well as well. That's a part of graduated response, not just the negative. And that second one there, if we don't consider what is going on in that specific youth life, we may actually increase the chances of them failing their diversion and being unsuccessful because we've thrown up more barriers than what we had intended to do. We'll talk more about that here in a minute as well. That third bullet, we want to give the youth a chance to build those skills. We don't just want to tell them, hey, you did this wrong. We want to actually help them build them. And one example of that would be working with a youth on cognitive restructuring. So we see a behavior that's occurring, and we're going to work with some cognitive restructuring skills to be able to help this youth start making some better choices and see that even without us, they can make those logical and pro-social choices in the day-to-day. So I've been talking about studies, and here's a couple of them mentioned here, if you'd actually like to look at those and see what I've been talking about. But these are some of the studies that point us to some of these conclusions that we've been talking about. And then pulling out here, we see that blanket terms are not good. Some people would say like cookie cutter case plans, you know, those kinds of things. We don't want to have that kind of approach. Ultimately, from this slide, what I want you to bring away is for every negative interaction we have with the youth, studies suggest we need to have 4 positive interactions with that same youth. Otherwise, we're going to increase their chances of recidivism. And that may seem kind of crazy. It may seem like, you know, everyone's always like talking about this give everybody a trophy culture. And it may seem on the surface that that's what we're saying here, but really it's not. It's just saying the times that a youth does something good, acknowledge those. As basic as they came in on time or they were early for the appointment. That's a positive interaction that we can say, hey, thanks for being here on time. That's something very basic, but it's just acknowledging that. And so that's going to kind of stack up those positive interactions. We don't have to go pulling things out of the air and making up positives. We definitely don't want to do that. You see here the reactive and proactive comparison here. And our goal is always the proactive reinforcement. We have moved away from reactive monitoring. We don't want to be a reactive monitoring program. We know it's not effective. We know that we can see proactive building. The proactive approach is going to build that infrastructure for that pro-social change and development that I was talking about earlier. So during the diversion, during all of our interactions with the youth, we're always trying to connect the youth with education, treatment, and that accountability that they need. That's always our goal. Our goal is to reduce the chances of recidivism. And that's where the FAIR team comes into play. As CDW's done all they can possibly do, or the youth has met the high needs requirements and things like that, they come into play. They come in with this, they are presented to the FAIR team. What do we expect from the FAIR team? Here's the KRS for those of you that are minded in this way, who actually like to read these kinds of things. But beyond that, this is the FAIR team mission. And forgive me, I'm going to read for a bit here, but the FAIR team is designed to develop enhanced case management plans and opportunities for services for children referred to the team through the CDW program. Fair team members shall support the mission of diversion and the fair team and strive to always make decisions in the best interest of the child. That mission for the fair team, it's pretty basic. It makes sense, but that's what we're trying to do. That's what we're trying to accomplish. And a part of that is going to be that confidentiality component. Every member is required to sign an agreement of confidentiality. And prior to the meeting date, every member should receive an agenda. They might receive an agenda through secure documents, or they may actually receive an encrypted email with that agenda. But either way, you're receiving that, and confidentiality is a part of that process. As far as composition goes, you can see here those people that are listed in KRS. We want, obviously, the CDW. We want mental health, RIAC, LIAC people to be involved. The cabinet, county attorney, public defender's office, law enforcement. That's one of our biggest challenges across the state, is getting that law enforcement involvement in our fair teams. And then other persons that are involved in juvenile justice issues. These are the people that we want to be a part of it. And the max for each fair team is 15 people. KRS mandates that we do not want to exceed 15 fair team members, which is not an issue in most counties, but some counties, they have large numbers and they fill that 15 very easily. There are other persons, right? You look at that list and say, well, there are some people that should be on fair teams that aren't necessarily on that mandated list. And we understand that. So we actually do have a process. The CDS would talk with the fair team and they would discuss whether or not someone is suitable to be on their fair team. And then they would kind of maybe vote or come to a consensus. And then the CDS would be responsible for giving that new member an orientation, similar to this, just kind of giving them a rundown of what the expectations are for that member. That might mean maybe, you know, each county has unique programs. So if you have a program that's really, really involved in the community, it makes sense for them to have some sort of representation on the fair team, because they may be a resource in the future or be able to get a youth connected in some way. So those are the kinds of people we often see in these kinds of circumstances. So what cases would you see on a fair team if you were on a fair team? These are some of the things that you would see. I don't want to read this to you, through it. I mean, you see that an amended case may come to the fair team. That an amended diversion means the original diversion agreement has been changed in some way. That might mean that they added new terms. Maybe they changed dates. Maybe they removed terms. It would just depend on the situation and the barriers that may be occurring. And then that failure to appear, if you're wondering what would consist as a failure to appear, in this case, a CDW would have tried to make phone calls to the family to get them in the office. They would have sent letters and probably even made other extra efforts. There are times we would get SROs to go to a house to deliver a letter. We would sometimes go to schools, different things that we try to do. We do everything we can possibly do to get this youth into our office as a CDW. And if they can't get them in, then the case would get forwarded on to the CDS and then perhaps would be presented to the fair team. And you may wonder what happens before the fair team meets. This kind of gives you a rundown of some of the things that a CDS would be doing in preparation. They're talking to the families, they're talking to the service providers, counselors, they're talking to the schools, all these different partners, all these different people that are involved in this youth's life. They're talking to them. They're meeting with the youth, they're administering that Game Q3 and seeing what it says. And they're compiling all of this information. And they're going to present it to the fair team and say, this is what we found. These are the needs that this youth has. These are the barriers that they have. How can we help them be successful? That's kind of the rundown of what happens before the fair team meeting. During the fair team meeting, we've got that confidentiality that we talked about. The CDS is responsible for providing all the information we just discussed. They'll have paperwork that they would cycle through. Each member at this meeting would sign that confidentiality form that we mentioned. Excuse me. The CDS is going to present new cases. They're going to review cases that have already been presented. The team in the CDS would then explore strengths and barriers of the child and family. And those are, as you know, going to be unique across the board oftentimes, but one commonality would be transportation, right? That's usually the big commonality we see across each county, each youth would see that one usually. The needs of the family and youth would be discussed, and then any natural supports would be identified. We may have met with the youth and family, we may have talked to all these people, but then in the FAIR team meeting, we bring things up and we say who these strengths are and what things are going on in this youth's life. But then we find out from the FAIR team, there are other strengths that this youth may have. There are other connections that this youth may have. So the FAIR teams can really help us kind of get that information and pull it out, and we can help that youth be more successful. More KRS if you want to see the duties spelled out in KRS form here. Otherwise, we talk about sharing information. During the meeting, the FAIR team members are going to contribute all they know about this youth. Now, I'm going to be honest and with you all here. One of the problems we might see in some FAIR teams is they may want to share a little bit too much, right? They get into the point of, rather than really looking at a holistic approach and trying to see the needs and the barriers of a youth, they start talking about everything in this youth's life. And that can kind of pull us away from that main vein of what we're trying to accomplish, right? We're trying to really just be looking at relevant information that we can share within our departments, and then coming to that holistic, informed decision on what would serve this youth best to be successful. And that would be where the diversion comes into play. A diversion would already be in place whenever a case is presented to the FAIR team, but the FAIR team could contribute and say, hey, what about this? What about that? Or the conversations that would come out may bring the CDS to make some sort of amendment to that diversion. The main goal is always for us to just be smart with our diversions, that specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely that we all know. That's always what we're trying to accomplish within the diversions. And the FAIR teams, we want the FAIR teams to be a part of those recommendations and those amendments, those conversations that occur. So with their supporting, we don't want too much intervention. We don't want to over service or over treat, because we know this is going to increase the likelihood of delinquency, most likely. An example of that would be if we refer a youth to an intensive program that meets Tuesdays and Thursdays every afternoon, and the youth is not able then to go to football practice or participate in clubs or go to the job that they have after school. We don't want to pull them away from the pro-social just to get them involved in these programs. So we really want to avoid that over servicing. And again, it goes against the grain kind of. We think we want to throw all these things at a youth because that'll fix it. But oftentimes it's actually the opposite effect. Common barriers, you can look at this. Maybe you could have other ones that may come to mind, but I think we could all say, yeah, families and youth we serve, transportation is often that hallmark piece that we see that youth are facing, that challenge there. So how can we overcome some of those barriers? And that's where the RIAC can come into play. And we've seen the RIAC come in to save the day in many counties across the state. And I'll give you a couple of examples, well, maybe a few. There are several counties where a youth could not make it to their counseling sessions, their therapy sessions. They couldn't make it to a program that we wanted them to attend. They couldn't make it to the CDW office for a meeting. And so the RIAC was able to come into play and help with that. Sometimes giving gas cards. Sometimes they were able to hook the family up with bus cards that would have them to get transportation that way. RIAC has been fabulous in that regard to be able to help us with that transportation barrier that is so common throughout our state. Especially in those, we have the rural areas, right? You say, oh, bus card, that's great. Yeah, but where I'm at in the West, we have cornfields and closed down coal mines. We don't have a bus system, right? So a bus card's not going to do them any good. So how are we going to help this family get to where they need to go? How are we going to help them get into therapy and those things that they need? We have instances, our program cannot send a youth to a program that requires money. So let me explain, so say I knew of an after school program that required the family to spend $5 to be a member, like maybe Boys and Girls Club. If they required them to have that membership fee, I could not require a youth on diversion to be a part of the Boys and Girls Club and go be a part of an after school program that they do, because that would then cost the family money. So we've had to be really creative. In one county, I'll say specifically in Henderson County, some years back, we had a program that we found that was great, all kinds of great stuff happening for the youth. but they were going to be charging a fee for the youth to participate in this program that was going to build all these pro-social skills. So we had folks talk to the RIAC there, and they were able to provide a scholarship. So they were able to say, oh, hey, we have enough money for 5 youth to attend. So then what would happen is the RIAC then provided that money to that program. And then we had those 5 spots that we could fill. So that was one way we were able to be really creative, and the RIAC really saved the day. And that program has been phenomenal. We have, last I checked, every youth, I think out of all the youth that participated, we only had 1 youth recidivate that participated in that program. So a really, really great program that was unique there to Henderson County. And that's something similar has happened in other counties as well, where RIACs have kind of come in and said, hey, we can provide scholarships for youth so they can participate in this program. So that's really exciting. Whenever I think of the RIAC, I think of that, and it makes me happy to know that youth are being connected to things that they typically may have been held back from. I grew up really, really poor. There was no way if I were to get in trouble, my mom would have been able to afford for me to go to some sort of after school program that cost her money. She would not have been able to do it. And those kinds of things would have been helpful for me to have those pro-social interactions. So if anytime we can overcome these barriers with the families, it's fantastic. And that's one way we can do it. As far as participating outside, many people think of the fair team and they're like, okay, so it's them meeting in this room and that's all it is, but it's actually more than that. There's oftentimes going to be meetings outside of the office setting, and that would be conversations happening. For example, maybe completing some sort of service referral or contributing resources or communicating with potential interventions. All these things would be happening. We may have a conversation today in our fair team meeting, and then you and I would need to follow up with that conversation or that referral process outside of the office. That's all covered underneath that confidentiality form that we sign. So those conversations are allowed. We're allowed to do that. And we need to do that sometimes, because you all know as well as I do, we can't get everything accomplished in one little meeting sometimes. This kind of continues that idea. The CDS may request input and support from a fair team member outside of the team setting. And then so they would mobilize whatever access that might need to take place. Or maybe we have something come up with a youth that's on our fair team caseload. And then we have to reach out to someone because there's a time sensitive situation coming up. Those kinds of things happen, as you all know. There's always training opportunities. We have principles of effective intervention, graduated responses, implicit bias, different trainings that we have that we could provide. So if you are a part of a fair team, you could always tell your CDS, hey, I'd like to get more training on some of these things, and that it could be brought to the team and trained. But beyond us, there are a lot of great professionals on fair teams that have lots of great information. So our fair teams are always open up to that as well, where someone that's on the team could come in and they could do a presentation that talk about maybe their program or what's the best kind of interventions and those kinds of things. Always open to building the training opportunities for our team members. Family consultation. When it comes to this isn't something we do common. It's not all the time, but it can happen. A youth may want to be heard by the fair team, or the fair team may even request that they want a youth or family to come in, actually to be a part of the team meeting that day. And anytime we do that, we wanted to realize that it's going to have to be run by the CDS, and the regional supervisor have to kind of discuss it first. And then if it's come to the conclusion that it's appropriate, then the team would have to remember that this is not a chance to kind of like just throw the book at the family and throw everything down on them. No, it's really just a chance to work with them and kind of come to the point where you can work through some of the barriers live and talk through some of those situations. And the expectation would be that the CDS would prepare the family to let them know kind of what to expect out of this meeting and those kinds of things. So they're not just being thrown into a room with 15 strangers and then go, holy cow, I didn't know it was going to be like this, you know? So some things to avoid for your fair teams. I'm not going to read this to you, but we want to focus on identifying the barriers so that way the youth can be successful. We want to be proactive rather than reactive, right? A fair team should not just discuss absences that a youth has had from school. Instead, we got to kind of think, what is causing the youth's absence? Engage in that solution-focused discussion by identifying what contributing factors or barriers are there to attending school. That's always our goal. MacArthur Foundation has some research that shows us that graduated responses, incentives, even perceived fairness, these are all paramount in A, getting buy-in, and B, for and decreasing that recidivism. Questions, these are questions we always want to ask and consider, always remembering in correlation with our goal as a team, our plan is youth-centered, individualized, and we're trying to accomplish what's in the youth's best interest. But these are questions that can help us when we're discussing what we need to do with the youth, what we need to do with their case, what's going on with them. And then this one are some questions that will kind of help us figure out what we want to do with the youth, as far as maybe they were in our office for fighting in the first place on an assault charge, and then they got in a fight again. You know, those kinds of questions that come up with recurring themes and things like that. These are some questions that can help us kind of direct that, what we want to do with the FAIR team, what we want to do with this youth that's on our caseload. In this term, success is very subjective. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, we would say it shouldn't be, right? Well, this is juvenile justice. It shouldn't be subjective. But success is subjective. We could say, hey, I need to lose 50 pounds. Well, you get to your goal time. You haven't lost 50 pounds, but you lost 25 pounds. That's some level of progress, right? 25 pounds is nothing to put your nose up at. You accomplished a portion of your goal. And that's kind of the idea we want to communicate with the youth is we want to celebrate the success and just be moving toward progress. I would go to that common analogy of the paper plate and the ceramic plate, right? Holidays are coming up and you're given a ceramic plate and someone else is given a paper plate, and you're not going to be able to fit the same amount of food on your plates. You're not going to be able to get a bunch of wet ingredients like gravy in that little thin paper plate. You want to put the gravy on the ceramic plate, right? So we want to keep those things in mind because we are all the same. Some of us are ceramic plates. Some of us are paper plates. Some of us are the really, really cheap paper plates. And some of us are like the fancy, really bougie paper plates, right? So we're all different. We all have different capabilities and strengths. We all have different infrastructure built around us. So we don't want to say success is this blanket idea. We want to really realize that it's going to look different for each youth that's on our caseload. But there are times where we've done all we could to overcome barriers. We've done all we could with our discussions and our interventions and getting youth connected in the community. And we just were not successful in bringing them to a point of success. So then as a last resort, we then refer these cases to the county attorney for a formal court process. So I'm going to stop sharing that. And see if any of you all have any questions or need any clarifications for that. I know it was kind of maybe quick, me reading through it. I want to make sure we got through it, but and make sure we have plenty of time for questions, because I know this is a subject that oftentimes people, they have those questions that they feel like they haven't gotten the answers they need. So if you have any questions, now's a great time to ask, whether it's how your FAIR team runs or you're not on a FAIR team, but you're just curious, anything at all.
Mr. Riley, I got a question. This is Donnie Ray, LRC, Big Sandy RIAC. First of all, I love your term bougie. I've never heard that on a Zoom before. God bless you. I appreciate there's somebody else out there with cornfields and coal mines, because we're right there, the other side of the state. In the RIAC, we have to keep a quorum tracker. Is there any kind of tracker that CDWs use for the FAIR teams?
We use those confidentiality forms I mentioned. So everyone has to sign that confidentiality form when they come in. And we really use that as our tracking sheet. And CDSs keep a copy of that with each meeting that they have files in their offices. And that's really the way we've often tracked attendance as far as that goes with our meetings. And then we had to go through that pain of physically assembling that whenever someone says this person hasn't been attending, and their man to kind of go back physically and look at all those and see, have they historically attended as they've been asked to attend.
Well, I had to physically do that last night and get it to Vanessa Brewer this morning, so I know what you're talking about. And the reason I asked that, is because in several of, first of all, let me tell you, we've got some great CDWs and CDS in the 5 counties that I have. A lot of times we'll have fair team meetings and the people that should be there, need to be there, aren't there.
Yeah.
You know, you got somebody that's doing therapy, or you got somebody that's doing whatever service it is. They're not there to provide an update, so we don't know what's going on. How can we remedy that? And I'll get off here and let you know. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll be honest with you, that's honestly the struggle, right? That's always the struggle. And our CDSs are incredible. They're always doing their absolute best to get those people in. They're making those calls directly and saying, hey, can we get you to come in? We'd love for you to be here. We need your voice. It's not just mandated. We actually want to hear what you have to say. We need to hear what you have to say. And sometimes that might mean the CDS has to just get caught up then from that person that way. But I'll be really transparent. What happens eventually if a CDS just cannot, they've done all they can do to get a member in, they'll contact their regional supervisor and they'll get them to try to help. And then oftentimes that regional supervisor would be able to kind of reach up to the next tier of their peers to say, hey, this person's not attending. And so then those conversations happen. There have been occasions where even those conversations have been fruitless. And then it has to go even higher up level, like to our management, for them to actually get involved to hopefully get that representation. And it's always a struggle. It's always that back and forth, us trying to get them in. And it's just, I have a feeling it's probably just going to always be that struggle because people are slammed and they put their caseloads ahead of that fair team because in their head it's like, well, that's not mine. I don't need that. But you know, we all know how important and useful it is for us to actually have that live interaction rather than having to correspond through emails and phone calls. And I don't know if we'll ever convince some people, but hopefully we can continue to just keep moving up forward on that.
Well, I will tell you, if you're keeping a tracker by those confidentiality forms, I have never been. I can't never get mine in on time.
Oh, when the signing those?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's my fault, but you know, they're on.
Well, oftentimes in that case, a CDS would know, you know, they've been here at least, so they wouldn't be saying, "Hey, I can't get Donnie to come in. He's supposed to be here."
Yeah,
that
but
wouldn't be an issue. So
for years, I've served a dual role as the mental health for my agency and Big Sandy RIAC. So I don't know the kids anymore.
Right.
I know them from football. I coach football or whatever. I know them from that, but you know, so, all right. Thank you, sir.
No problem.
So Jimmie, one of the questions in the chat box is, and I think you touched a little bit on this with transportation as a barrier, but what recommendations would you have for fair teams who have frequent referrals for youth who have truancy issues, sometimes missing up to 100 days of school, whose parents or guardians are not responsive to requests for diversion or requests to come to the CDW office to even implement recommendations for the youth versus having to continue to send them to court?
Ooh, that's a big one. That's one of the common struggles as well. So our CDWs and CDSs, they'll really try. Sometimes they'll go to the schools and they'll actually meet with the youth that way. We don't like to have to do that, but if we've tried all we can to get them in the office, a lot of times we would end up calling the schools and saying, hey, can I get in with such and such youth? What would be the best time of day, like with their schedule? And we would meet in some sort of a space there that would be, we could adhere to confidentiality. And we would meet with the youth. If we could try to get the mom or the guardian there, great. But worst case scenario, we've been really unsuccessful with accomplishing that, then we would just meet with the youth in that setting where we know they're already at. But they're truant, right? So maybe they're not at school all the time and we can't get them in the first place, right? And when those cases come up, we're still trying to be creative. We're trying, in some counties, we have satellite offices, like in Jefferson, they have satellite offices where like, hey, you can't get into the CDW office, so they can make it to one of these satellite offices. We have other counties that are able to do that as well. There's really not, unfortunately, a clear-cut answer for that. It's just us trying to address each situation with that. And sometimes it has to go to court, even though we absolutely don't want that to happen. It's what happens. Fortunately, sometimes we don't like for this to happen, but if a case goes to court And it was, the only reason it's there is because we could not get them in. Sometimes the judge can have that conversation and we can get that case to us. We don't love getting cases sent back because then it can kind of become a process of consistently happening. But that's one way we can get a case back sometimes if that was the only barrier. Hopefully that answers it to some degree. I know it doesn't answer it in a great way.
Jimmie, this is Michelle Cunningham. I'm the LRC for the Jefferson County, and that I sit in on the FAIR team, kind of in that dual role that Downey had mentioned for mental health and as a RIAC member. And that is one of the barriers that we are currently running into, is that we have a very large, significant amount of kids that are all being referred, and I say 100, plus easy days, which is concerning within itself that they've missed that long before they even get referred. But that these kids have missed a significant amount, and then the families are kind of like MIA. So we can't even like have eyes on the kids to even get them in, and then they have to go to court, and we're basically overloading our public defenders, and then they're kind of getting, I don't want to say peeved, but you could tell that they're getting very like disappointed,
Well,
because
yeah.
basically every court or every case that we're being, talked about is send them to court, send them to court, send them to court, because they can't get any response from the families. Despite, the best efforts from the CDS and CDWs. And, they've mentioned sending out letters and not hearing anything back, but we don't even know if the kids, half the time are even, and I hate to say this, but even alive or, even in the county, because nobody's laid eyes on these kids for so long. And trafficking in our area is pretty significant. So we don't know, like that is obviously a concern within ourselves, but I know that it's overloading the court system because they have so many kids that are being referred to court, because there's not any response from the families to even get the kids in. And the kids might be agreeable to diversions. We just don't know because the families aren't bringing them in, or they're not returning phone calls, or their phones are disconnected, or, the bail's not being, opened or responded to, or, things of that nature. So, what would be some other strategies as far as FAIR team members? Because I know that, other than just sending them to court, we're actually overloading our public defenders, when we say that, just send them to court, because basically that's all of the cases that we have right now. Is when we talk about them, it's we'll send them to court because they haven't been, responsive. Is there not any other solutions, or do we have to wait until it's like 100 days? Because the other barrier
No.
we run into is the age range.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
if
So
they're under
there are
12, your
many.
services, and if it's over 12, then that we run into those hiccups.
Right. Yeah. And like you said, part of it is we don't like receiving those youth when they've already had that many absences, and that's where it's difficult, because you have some schools that they're just trying to do all they can to get a youth back in before they file. And so that happens sometimes. And then we get the youth when they're way up there, and the number should not even be into the double digits. I mean, we're getting into the double digits, even into like the teens. It's like that definitely, makes sense to be going over to the CDW so they can start working that process before we ever get up to that high level of truancy. And I will say, just for your minds, just to know, we do track those numbers. Every single county, we have the ability to track what cases are going to court from the FAIR teams and what those cases were. So were they truancy cases? Were they assault cases? What kind of cases are being referred to court? And so then we have regional supervisors that then would intervene and say, okay, so what's this problem? We have 75% of our cases going to court are truancy cases, or they're FTA cases. This doesn't make any sense. So then those conversations would occur with the DPP and other people that may be related to that conversation that would happen. But those conversations do occur, but it doesn't take away from that problem that you're seeing, where you see this number, you don't want this youth going to court, but you tried all you can try. You've had phone calls, you've had letters, you've had FAIR team meetings, and you've used the 12 different phone numbers that you have for this family and the 6 different contacts that you have for this family. You've had law enforcement or SROs go to the home to deliver something to see if they can get them the information over, and you still can't get them in. And unfortunately, our hands are tied with the process, and we say, okay, well, the next step is having to go to court. So I think as a member, really the only thing I think you could do is asking that CDS if you all need help higher up. Do we need to bring in some higher ups to help us with this situation? Do we need to bring the regional supervisor into a conversation to figure out what we can do cut away at some of this that's causing such frustration with us and with the DPAs and others, because like you said, the DPAs are busy enough with the cases that they have, let alone throwing these cases in there that really are so oftentimes that they would never end up in court if it wasn't for that one situation. And I'm sorry, I don't have a better answer for you. That's the constant struggle, is us trying to overcome those barriers and to not fall into that pit of referrals for those reasons.
So another question in the chat box is, are virtual settings provided for youth or family? And I think you touched a little bit on this when you said that they could go to one of those satellite offices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they have satellite offices that we could go to. When I say satellite, I mean like a literal office across town. But yeah, we can definitely offer, if we have a family that can't make it in, but they have internet, fantastic. We can do an online meeting if we need to. And beyond virtual, say we can't get you to come in the office because of the shifts you work or whatever the kind of things. If worst case scenario, we will do our meeting over the phone with the youth. We've done that many times. We will do all we can to have a meeting with this family or this youth. I mean, if we have a family member that can't make it because of the shifts, the youth can come in on their own and we can debrief the parent later. We can have these meetings on the phone. We can have them on Teams or Zoom. We can have them at the school. We can have them at the library. And I say those places, that's keeping in mind confidentiality of how we can have those conversations and end up in those places without people knowing why we're there and those kinds of things. But yeah, we're always trying to do all we can, and we'll speak to the youth and have those meetings any way possible to try to not get that to that point where they're going to fair teams or they're going to court for those purposes.
Sorry, I'm frantically taking notes over here so I don't miss
No,
any
you're
of
good.
this. Another question that's in the chat box is restorative justice is a program started in southeastern Kentucky. We give both victim and offenders a voice on how to repair harm. What would be the best way to get referrals for youth? And then she says we work in congruent with other services offered.
Great. I love restorative justice. That's a program that we have approved across the state. So if you have a program that's not being used by our program, I would encourage you to reach out to the CDW's office, let them know, hey, we have this. We're open to taking referrals, and they can start that process. If you make that phone call and you still don't see any youth come, you can get a hold of the CDW's office or the regional supervisors, talk to your CDS, ask them to get them in contact with their program coordinator. And the program coordinator can also help with that, because sometimes a CDW may say, oh, I feel too overwhelmed to get this program going. Well, that's the job of a program coordinator, is to get those things processing in those regions. So if you find that you've had those conversations with CDWs and CDSs and you're still not getting those referrals, the next step is the program coordinator within our program. And they will definitely get that ball rolling, because they're always trying to find good programs like restorative justice, because that's a great program that we love making referrals to.
So another question we have in the chat box is, are FAIR team members allowed to reach out to youth and families, or is the CDW and or the CDS the only ones able to do that?
That's a good question. So if you're a person that already works with the youth and family, absolutely, right? Because that's a part of your job anyway. Like if you work with the cabinet and they're on your caseload, then yeah, you're going to reach out to them. But if you're just with, say you're with a counseling agency and you're a part of the FAIR team, if you were asked to reach out to them, great. But yeah, we don't typically say, yeah, just reach out to the youth and families. It's usually going to be initiated by the CDW or CDS, or they're already a part of your caseload in some degree. Sometimes it might mean the CDW or CDS would flat out ask you, hey, could you reach out to them? I'm going to tell them that you'll be reaching out to them and that you're with such and such, and this is why you're reaching out. We don't want too many people just jumping in, right? Because that's going to be overwhelming for some families. So we don't want to do that. And plus we want to make sure we're not duplicating work and those kinds of things, but hopefully that answers your question.
Now, let me just make sure that I understand that in the notes that I'm writing down. So if
Mhm.
you had, let's say that you had the children's services director from the community mental health center that was part of the FAIR team or worked closely with the CDW, which they do because they're on the RIAC, that conversation need to happen if the children's services director had that youth on their caseload? Would they need to talk with the CDS or the CDW first before making that contact, just to make sure it's not an overload? Or
No, you'd be having your regular conversations you typically would be having, but the goal would be hopefully that you and the CDS are in constant conversation on the progress with that youth and what the case plans are that you both have. So that way we're not duplicating and making life more stressful for the family or wasting our time, right? We're trying to find a program. It's like, oh, they're already in this great program. Why am I trying to find another one? So yeah, as long as we're having those conversations, no, we all have to do our jobs, right? We're trying to do what we have to do. So yeah, do what you got to do. But the biggest thing is just keeping that line of communication up. And that's what the fair teams are for, right? Is to be able to have that time where we can set aside and talk and keep up with what everybody's doing with the different youth and families we serve.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
This is Dee Dee. My apologies. I wanted to clarify my question. I'm not sure I understood. I think my question goes back to the youth that that the CDS and the CDW are not able to contact to bring to fair teams. So are those names given at fair team meetings? And then allowed for fair team members to say, hey, well, I do have that youth, or I know who that youth is, or I know that they're working, or they're going to be here, or here.
Yeah.
So that was my question, more about the initial outreach.
Yeah. So what that would look like is, we're having the conversation and the CDS says, this youth is Johnny Doe, and I've done this, and this, and can't get them in. Nobody knows where they're at. And then you're like, well, I know where they're going to be on Thursday. They're going to be such and such. Then me as a CDS, I would say, hey, could you give this letter to them, or could you let them know I need them to be at my office, and here's my phone number, or can I come to you to that meeting and see if we can get this conversation occurring, so that way we can get lined up with them to come into the office on a certain time. So yeah, great question. Does that answer it better?
It does. It helps with it allows for more teamwork too.
Yes.
When the CDSs and CDWs are struggling to make
absolutely. And that confidentiality form saves us with that, right? Because it keeps us within that realm where we're both trying to work with this youth and family in that regard.
All right, so I have a question about possible trainings needed to support, or TA needed to support the collaboration between RIAC and fair teams. I know that in the world of RIAC, sometimes there's a lot of turnover, whether it be through the Community Mental Health Center within LRC, or it be one of the mandated members of the RIAC, because everybody has lots of hats to wear. So are there trainings or let's see, opportunities for TA that could be accessible and or provided as needed, or on a routine basis, to make sure that that everyone knows what that partnership should look like? Does that make sense?
So as far as what the fair team synergy should look like, is that kind of what you're saying? Yeah. Or
well, if we have new members come on board to the RIAC, like how do they get acclimated to the work of the fair team and the CDW process?
Yeah, so as far as RIAC specific, I don't know of anything that we have in place, but it could be something like this, where you have new people that you would say, hey, we want new people to get this fair team training. If they're a part of a fair team and they are new, they're going to receive an orientation from the CDS as well with almost this exact information from today. They're going to receive this information when they become a new fair team member. But if they're not a part of the fair team, then that would be something that would need to be initiated outside of us. But we would definitely be willing to have those types of trainings to keep people in the loop of what we are doing and what the goal is of the fair team.
Hey, this is Jonathan White. I'm with the Kentucky Office of Vocational Rehabilitation, and just wanted to say I really appreciate this presentation. I've learned a lot. And I wanted to ask, how often are you all getting these youth involved with vocational rehabilitation? Do you guys use that as a resource?
It varies, and different facility, different places have different requirements. So it kind of really depends on what those requirements are, because we are limited on what we can require of a youth.
Mhm.
Sometimes we may more often than not send them to you as a referral and suggest it, right? This
Sure.
thing for you. This would help you. This would build you. You have these goals. They would help you reach those goals, but we wouldn't be able to require it maybe. But in other places, we are able to require certain things. If we are aware of resources like yours, we make referrals like crazy, because we want youth to see those external contacts to be able to build them up in a pro-social way. So if you feel like you don't get a lot of youth that you're looking for, never hesitate, reach out to the CDW's office, let them know, hey, can I meet with you sometime and give you an idea of what we do? And then kind of just let them know what you do. And again, those program coordinators can be a great contact, because they don't just cover one county, they cover multiple counties.
Mhm.
If you can kind of get more bang for your buck, you can meet one time with one person, and then they can debrief an entire region on your program or all the counties that you may serve.
Yeah, that's great. Our program is voluntary. So every now and then we have someone that says, well, I was court ordered to come here. And like, well, we can't really hold you accountable for that. That's
Right.
between you and the judge or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's just a really valuable resource. And they always say, like, idle hands, the devil's playground. If you can get young people start to think about work early on, it gives them more of a sense of purpose, and it's just a really valuable resource. And I'm happy to come and present sometime, or have somebody from our agency come present if you ever need us, because we do lots of good things for everyone, but also with youth as well. So really appreciate you.
All right. Does anybody have any further questions for Jimmie?
There's one in the chat. Someone asked if there's a list available that shows the CDW CDSs for all the counties.
I know we have one internally. I'm trying to think if we have one externally, other than just looking on to the websites out there. It might be just having to reach out through the courts to find out who that CDW is in your county. There may be a list that I'm just ignorant to. If one of you CDWs or CDSs or supervisors that are on here may know of a list of that manner, feel free to share it. But I can't think of anything off the top of my head that would be an external list like that. And I'll ask those above me that know a lot more than me if there is, and if there is, I'll get that to Vanessa, and maybe she can disseminate that to you all if there is in fact a list like that. Otherwise, I would think of just typing in court designated worker for Bourbon County and finding it that way, or calling the courthouse and saying I need the number to the CDW.
Would the courthouse also have the number for the program coordinator?
They probably wouldn't, because they wouldn't even probably know what you're talking about. So you could reach out if you know a regional supervisor in a region for our program. They would be able to give that to you. Any CDW or CDS, you should be able to reach out to them for that information. And they'll know who that person is, their phone number, their email, all that kind of stuff. We've only got 9 PCs in the entire state, so there's not a lot of us. I used to be one, not a lot of them out there, so it wouldn't be too hard to contact them most likely.
For the LRCs that's on here, we come up with a pretty good idea. Every mandated member in our RIAC is going to do a training of their department, their agency, which pretty much covers everything that we've been talking about with our Q&A here. So I just thought I want to point that out. We've got a really good RIAC, and we got some good people. So that's what we come up with.
Awesome.
And so if you have members of your RIAC that weren't able to be here today, which I know that's probably the case, this is definitely something that I would recommend that this link, once it's put on the YouTube channel, that you share with all of your members and encourage them to watch before they come to the next RIAC meeting, whether that's in December or January, and provide that time for Q&A at your RIACs as well. And everybody's got a CDW on their RIAC that can, hopefully answer any questions that anybody might have.
I'm glad you said that, because that would be one person as well. If you can't find all those other people, you can talk to your CDW contact on your RIAC, and they'd be able to get you in contact with that piece, with at least their PC, and you could get those conversations rolling.
All right, are there any further questions? Well, if not, Jimmie, I want to thank you for coming and sharing this information with us today. I know it was kind of short notice. We had actually had a different session planned for December, but when we realized that we had a lot of new leadership on the RIAC, so we've had some questions that have come up lately, we thought that it might be best to switch the previous session out for this one. And I have learned so much, and I've attended FAIR team trainings in the past, and I always learn something every time that I attend a training. So thank you very much. And I'm glad this is going to be recorded, or that it has been recorded and it's going to be on the YouTube channel for people to use as a resource. I just want to remind you that there is a session evaluation. I'm going to put that in the chat box right now. So if you can go to that and complete that, that would be wonderful. Also, if you need a certificate of attendance, please feel free to email me. I think Lee had put my email in the chat box earlier. And just to let you guys know, our next RIAC Learning Series session is scheduled for January the 6th, and the title is Using Social Media to Share and Promote System of Care Efforts. So we are currently working to get that flyer out to everyone, and that flyer will include the January through June 2023 RIAC Learning Series session. So watch your email inbox. There'll be more to come on that, and we hope to see you there.
Vanessa,
And if there's, yes.